archaeologist हैं और तुम्हें जमीन के नीचे दबी एक छोटी सी सील मिलती है।
हाँ,
It's just a tiny piece of stone, but it can unlock the secrets of an entire civilization. Cool है ना?
बिल्कुल।
आज हम exactly यही करने वाले हैं। We are going on a time traveling adventure from the earliest humans in India to the great cities of the Indus Valley. We'll unpack everything.
I'm ready.
So before we jump into our time machine, जल्दी से subscribe, like और notification bell को on कर लो दोस्त. You don't want to miss a single clue in this epic historical detective story.
आज का हमारा सफर बहुत बड़ा है. We will cover a huge range of topics, starting from the very origin of state societies.
Right?
फिर we'll dive deep into sites like Rakhi Gari and explore the Paleolithic cultures of South India,
Okay.
of the Indus Valley civilization.
Wow, काफी कुछ है.
और भी, from the pit dwellers of Kashmir to the megaliths of the northeast, tribal contributions and the Iron Age, we will cover it all, question by question, in full detail. So are you ready? Let's begin.
Question: Origin of state societies.
Broad micro-theme, the origins and evolutionary mechanisms leading to complex, centralized political systems from tribal structures.
कभी सोचा है किंग्स, गवर्नमेंट्स और बड़े-बड़े एम्पायर्स की शुरुआत कैसे हुई? From small tribes to massive states, ये जंप कैसे हुआ? चलो, let's unpack this.
Let's start with the basics. The emergence of state societies, मतलब इनका बनना, human history में एक pivotal transformation है.
अच्छा,
It's a massive shift from small, egalitarian tribal organizations, जहाँ सब लोग more or less equal थे, to complex, centralized political systems.
right.
इन नए systems में formal institutions थे, जैसे laws और armies, social hierarchies थीं with kings and commoners, और एक single centralized authority.
So what were the main theories behind this massive change? ये सब हुआ कैसे?
We can group them into a few major categories.
Okay.
First, चलो let's talk about material and conflict theories.
Okay.
इसमें सबसे फेमस है हाइड्रोलिक थ्योरी. ये थ्योरी कहती है कि लार्ज स्केल इरिगेशन सिस्टम्स जैसे कैनाल्स और डैम्स को मैनेज करने के लिए एक सेंट्रल अथॉरिटी की जरूरत थी.
पानी कंट्रोल करने के लिए.
एग्जैक्टली. तो पानी कंट्रोल करने के लिए सेंट्रलाइज स्टेट्स बने जैसे एंशिएंट मेसोपोटामिया और इजिप्ट में हुआ.
Interesting.
फिर आती है कॉन्फ्लिक्ट थ्योरी जो आर्ग्यू करती है कि जैसे जैसे पॉपुलेशन बढ़ी, रिसोर्सेज जैसे लैंड और वाटर के लिए कंपटीशन बढ़ गया. स्टेट्स इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स को मैनेज करने और वॉर्स लड़ने के लिए बने. एक क्लासिक एग्जाम्पल है नाइल वैली.
So it was all about water and war या कुछ और भी था?
बिल्कुल कुछ और भी था. दैट ब्रिंग्स अस टू इकोलॉजिकल एंड आइडियोलॉजिकल फ्रेमवर्क्स. एक आइडिया है वॉलंटरी कोऑपरेशन थ्योरी.
Okay. ये क्या है?
ये सजेस्ट करती है कि नियोलिथिक रेवोल्यूशन के बाद लोगों ने सरप्लस फूड प्रोड्यूस करना शुरू किया.
Right.
इससे स्पेशलाइजेशन हुआ. कुछ लोग पॉटर्स बन गए, कुछ ट्रेडर्स. इस नई कॉम्प्लेक्स इकोनॉमी को मैनेज करने के लिए लोगों ने वॉलंटरीली एक गवर्निंग बॉडी बनाई.
अच्छा.
एक ग्रेट एग्जाम्पल है यूरोक सिटी इन मेसोपोटामिया. फिर है इकोलॉजिकल थ्योरी बाय जूलियन स्टुअर्ट. ये स्टेट्स को एनवायरनमेंट के लिए एक अडेप्टिव रिस्पॉन्स की तरह देखती है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल द इंका सिविलाइजेशन इन द एंडीज माउंटेन्स.
For ideas or beliefs, did they play a role?
अ ह्यूज रोल. वही है आइडियोलॉजिकल थ्योरी. ये फोकस करती है कि कैसे रिलीजन और आइडियोलॉजी को यूज किया गया रूलर्स की अथॉरिटी को लेजिटिमाइज करने के लिए.
जैसे?
फॉर एग्जाम्पल एंशिएंट इजिप्ट में फेरो को एक डिवाइन किंग माना जाता था, अ गॉड ऑन अर्थ.
Right.
इस बिलीफ से उसका रूल अनक्वेश्चनेबल हो गया. तो कंक्लूजन ये है कि द ओरिजिन ऑफ स्टेट सोसाइटीज इज मल्टी कॉजल.
मतलब कोई एक रीजन नहीं था.
बिल्कुल. इट्स अ मिक्स ऑफ मटेरियल, एनवायरमेंटल एंड आइडियोलॉजिकल फैक्टर्स, नॉट अ सिंगल स्ट्रेट लाइन. इसको समझना मॉडर्न गवर्नेंस और पावर स्ट्रक्चर्स को समझने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है.
अच्छा, एक सवाल. How can you structure this answer for maximum marks?
इससे क्लैरिटी आती है एंड इट शोज द एग्जामिनर यू कैन ऑर्गेनाइज कॉम्प्लेक्स इन्फॉर्मेशन. समझे?
Got it. And why is it important to mention criticisms of these theories?
Quick hint, it shows a balanced, critical understanding, not just rote learning. For example, आप mention कर सकते हैं कि इनमें से कई theories यूरोसेंट्रिक है, मतलब यूरोपियन हिस्ट्री पर बेस्ड है और हर जगह अप्लाई नहीं होती.
What's the best way to use examples like Mesopotamia or the Incas?
Quick hint, link each example directly to the specific theory it supports. जैसे hydraulic theory, mention Egypt. Ecological theory, mention the Incas. That makes your argument powerful.
और इन सब theories का foundation मतलब archaeology, इसका क्या role है?
Quick hint, archaeology provides the tangible proof, the artifacts and structures that these theories are built upon. हमें large granaries, writing systems और monumental architecture के evidence मिलते हैं जो एक state की तरफ point करते हैं.
Right. So why is a multi-causal conclusion stronger than picking one theory?
Quick hint, it reflects the complexity of human history and shows a mature perspective. It proves you understand that बड़े changes का rarely कोई एक single cause होता है.
Now pause and practice saying this aloud. The origin of state societies is a complex multi-causal process involving a dynamic interplay of material, ecological, and ideological factors.
In short, states didn't just appear. They evolved from a complex mix of managing resources, resolving conflict, and the power of belief systems.
So that was the big picture of how societies get organized. Ab chalo, let's zoom into one of the most fascinating and organized ancient societies and a very specific site in India. Hamara next question hai Rakhi Ghadi ke bare mein.
Question, critically describe evidences from Rakhi Gadi and its linkages to Harappan civilization. 20 marks 2024.
Broad micro theme, the archaeological significance of Rakhi Gadi as a major urban center that defines the origins, diversity, and material culture of the Indus Valley Civilization, IVC.
What if I told you कि इंडिया में एक ऐसी साइट है जो इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन की स्टोरी को रीराइट कर सकती है?
Really?
हाँ, हरियाणा के हिसार डिस्ट्रिक्ट में राखी घड़ी इज दैट गेम चेंजर. Let's dig in.
To begin, Rakhigadi is one of the largest known IVC sites, spanning over 350 hectares.
That's huge.
हाँ, और ये 2600-1900 BCE के बीच की है। यहाँ एक्सकवेशन से हड़प्पन अर्बनाइजेशन, उनके लाइफस्टाइल और इवन उनके जेनेटिक लीनिएज के बारे में क्रिटिकल एविडेंस मिला है, which is super important.
Okay, so what are the key archaeological finds at Rakhi Ghade? What makes it so special?
First, it's urban planning and architecture. इसमें सारे क्लासिक हड़प्पन फीचर्स हैं, well-planned streets in a grid pattern, sophisticated drainage systems और structured brick architecture.
Bricks का वही standardized ratio?
बिल्कुल, the bricks use the standardized 4:1 ratio, just like in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. ये पूरी सिविलाइजेशन में एक डीप कल्चरल कंसिस्टेंसी कंफर्म करता है।
So it was a well-planned city. What about its economy?
It was a significant trade and craft center. हमें लार्ज ग्रेनरीज, warehouses और pottery और brick making के लिए कई kilns के एविडेंस मिले हैं।
Metalworking भी?
हाँ, we have also found evidence of metalworking, especially copper, and thousands of terracotta figurines. ये advanced craft specialization suggest करता है।
अच्छा.
और जो everyday objects हैं, the material culture, वो भी classic हड़प्पन है। Artifacts include beautiful pottery, ornaments made from semi-precious stones like carnelian and agate, और uniform weights and measures.
जिससे पता चलता है कि standardized हड़प्पन economic system का part था.
Exactly. Also, the discovery of 62 burials gives us deep insights into their death rituals.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What does Rakhi Ghade tell us about the bigger picture of the Harappan civilization?
This is the most critical part. राखीगढ़ी एक evolutionary bridge बनाता है। साइट पर 4600 BCE के आसपास के प्री-हड़प्पन सेटलमेंट के एविडेंस हैं।
अच्छा.
इससे ये सजेस्ट होता है कि IVC अचानक से नहीं आई। It evolved from earlier local cultures at the very same site.
So it connects the early and mature Harappan periods.
Yes. और सबसे क्रिटिकली, यहाँ मिले स्केलेटन्स के recent DNA एनालिसिस ने ओल्ड आर्यन इन्वेजन थ्योरी को चैलेंज किया है।
ये तो बहुत बड़ी बात है.
हाँ, the DNA shows a strong genetic connection to ancient and modern South Asian populations, but not to people from the Eurasian steppe.
जहाँ से invaders आने थे.
Right. This is a huge deal. It strongly suggests the Harappan identity had deep indigenous roots. तो in conclusion, राखीगढ़ी एक pivotal site है।
ये IVC की सोफिस्टिकेशन और स्केल को कंफर्म करती है, बट साथ ही उसकी रीजनल डाइवर्सिटी भी दिखाती है।
और इसका जेनेटिक एविडेंस साउथ एशियन हिस्ट्री के रीवैल्यूएशन के लिए फोर्स कर रहा है।
अच्छा, एक सवाल, हाउ डज द 4.2.1 ब्रिक रेशियो सर्व एज पावरफुल एविडेंस?
क्विक हिंट, इट्स लाइक अ सिग्नेचर स्टैम्प। ये दिखाता है कि राखीगढ़ी was part of the same cultural and administrative system as other IVC cities, even those hundreds of kilometers away.
For a critically described question, what is the most critical point from Rakhi Ghade?
Quick hint, the DNA evidence challenging the Aryan invasion theory. It's the game-changing discovery that rewrites old historical narratives. Always highlight this.
How does Rakhi Ghade show both uniformity and diversity within the IVC?
Quick hint, uniformity in urban planning and weights में दिखती है। डाइवर्सिटी लोकल पॉटरी स्टाइल्स और कुछ यूनिक बरियल प्रैक्टिसेस में दिखती है, जिससे पता चलता है कि IVC एक मोनोलिथिक एम्पायर नहीं था, बल्कि इंटीग्रेटेड रीजन्स का कलेक्शन था।
What is the significance of it being an evolutionary bridge?
Quick hint, it proves the IVC wasn't an import. ये दिखाता है कि it evolved from earlier pre-Harappan cultures at the same location, demonstrating deep indigenous roots.
और इस आंसर को स्ट्रक्चर कैसे करें टू हाईलाइट राखी गढ़ी's importance?
Quick hint, start with the physical evidence, planning, artifacts, फिर उसकी biggest significance for the whole civilization, chronology, genetics, पर जाओ. This shows a logical flow from observation to interpretation.
Practicing this, Rakhi Ghade is pivotal because it provides not just material evidence of Harappan urbanism, but also crucial genetic evidence that challenges long-held theories about its origins.
In short, Rakhigadi is not just another Harappan city, it's a key piece of the puzzle that helps us understand the IVC's deep indigenous roots and evolution.
Going to the Old Stone Age in South India, what clues did our earliest ancestors leave behind? Let's find out.
Question. Describe the important Paleolithic sites from South India with suitable examples. What is the significance of South Indian Paleolithic cultures? 20M, 2024.
Broad microtheme, archaeological evidence of early human migration, technological evolution, and adaptive strategies during the Old Stone Age in peninsular India.
Imagine a volcanic super eruption, so massive it covers a whole subcontinent in ash.
Oh, wow.
Do you think early humans could have survived that? Well, South India has the answer.
First, an introduction. The Paleolithic period or Old Stone Age is all about the earliest stone tools. साउथ इंडिया में डेक्कन प्लेटो एक ट्रेजर ट्रोव है साइट्स का जो अर्ली ह्यूमन एक्टिविटी की एक कंटिन्यूअस स्टोरी दिखाती है फ्रॉम द लोअर टू द अपर पेरियोलिथिक पीरियड्स स्पैनिंग ओवर अ मिलियन years.
So let's go on a tour of these ancient sites. Where do we start?
Let's start with the lower Paleolithic sites. सबसे फेमस है अतिरमपक्कम इन तमिलनाडु.
मैंने सुना है इसके बारे में.
It's incredibly old, about 1.5 million years, और इसमें classic Acheulean technology जैसे hand axes और cleavers हैं.
1.5 million years?
हाँ, it's one of the oldest such sites outside Africa. फिर आपके पास Gudiam Caves also in Tamil Nadu and the Hansgebeg Jbal Valley in Karnataka हैं, जो दिखाते हैं कि कैसे ये tool technologies हजारों सालों में evolve हुई.
Okay, so that's the earliest phase. What came next?
Next are the middle and upper Paleolithic sites. यहाँ पर चीजें dramatic हो जाती हैं. This site of Javalapuram in Andhra Pradesh is critical.
क्यों?
वहां पर टोबा सुपर इरप्शन जो 74,000 साल पहले हुआ था, उसकी thick layers of ash है.
ओके
Importantly, हमें stone tools ash layer के नीचे और ऊपर दोनों जगह मिलते हैं.
मतलब
This is solid proof that humans survived this massive catastrophe in India.
दैट इज इनक्रेडिबल
हाँ, फिर है कुरनूल केव्स आंध्र प्रदेश जो हमें इंडिया के अर्लीस्ट एविडेंस ऑफ बोन टूल्स एंड माइक्रोलिथ्स यानी छोटे शार्प स्टोन टूल्स देती हैं.
Wow. Survival against a super volcano. So what is the overall significance of these South Indian cultures? What do they teach us?
उनकी सिग्निफिकेंस बहुत बड़ी है. फर्स्ट, माइग्रेशन एंड एडेप्टेशन. साइट्स लाइक आतिराम पक्कम आउट ऑफ अफ्रीका थ्योरी ऑफ ह्यूमन डिस्पर्सल को सपोर्ट करती हैं.
Okay.
जबलपुरम इनक्रेडिबल ह्यूमन रेजिलियंस दिखाती है. सेकंड, टेक्नोलॉजिकल एवोल्यूशन. हमें एक क्लियर ग्रेजुअल प्रोग्रेशन दिखता है फ्रॉम क्रूड हैंड एक्सेस इन द लोअर पेलियोलिथिक टू सोफिस्टिकेटेड माइक्रोलिथ्स एंड बोन टूल्स इन द अपर पेलियोलिथिक.
और उनके खाने पीने के बारे में?
That's the third point. They tell us about subsistence and environment, showing use of fire and smart hunting strategies for the animals of that time. और finally, इन cultures ने later Mesolith और Neolithic cultures के लिए foundation रखा.
So in conclusion,
In conclusion, South Indian Paleolithic cultures are crucial for understanding not just Indian, but global human evolution. They tell a story of migration, incredible adaptation, and technological innovation over millennia.
a quick question. Why is Atirampakkam's age so significant?
Quick hint, its 1.5 million year old dating provides some of the earliest evidence for human presence in India, connecting it to the larger story of global human dispersal out of Africa.
And how does the Jwalapuram site provide a unique story of resilience?
Quick hint, by showing continuity of human life and technology across the Toba volcanic ash layer, it challenges theories that the eruption caused a major population bottleneck or extinction event in the region.
How do you show technological evolution in your answer?
Quick hint, structured chronologically. Lower Paleolithic Acheulean hand axes, Middle Paleolithic flake tools, and Upper Paleolithic microliths bone tools. This shows a clear progression of skill.
What are the 4 key points of significance you must mention?
Quick hint, migration, technology, subsistence, and foundation for later cultures. Yaad rakhna, these are the 4 pillars of your answer.
And how do sites like Kurnool Caves add a new dimension compared to Atirampakkam?
Quick hint, Kunul shows the use of a new material, bone, and smaller, more refined microliths. This marks a significant cognitive and technological leap.
Practice this line. South Indian Paleolithic sites like Atirampakkam and Jwalapuram are significant for demonstrating early human migration, technological evolution, and remarkable environmental adaptation.
In short, the old Stone Age in South India wasn't just about primitive tools. It was a dynamic period of innovation and survival that shaped the course of human history in the subcontinent.
From stone tools to art?
Yes, our prehistoric ancestors were artists too. Next, we travel to the Himalayas to see some of the earliest art in the region. Let's explore the prehistoric rock art of Uttarakhand.
Question. Prehistoric rock art from Uttarakhand. Broad micro theme. The nature and significance of Mesolithic and Neolithic artistic expressions in the Himalayan region of India.
Ever wondered what the first artists in the Himalayas painted? Forget canvases. Their galleries were giant rock shelters. Chalo, let's decode their art.
As an introduction, prehistoric rock art एक window है into the socio-cultural and spiritual lives of early human communities.
अच्छा,
उत्तराखंड की रॉक आर्ट मेसोलिथिक पीरियड से है, अराउंड 10,000 8,000 BCE, और इसमें पेंटिंग्स और पेट्रोग्लिफ्स यानी रॉक कार्विंग्स दोनों हैं.
so where can we find this ancient art gallery?
The main site is Lakhudyar in the Almora district, जिसका मतलब है 1 lakh caves.
1 lakh caves.
हाँ, यहाँ की आर्ट मेसोलिथिक मानी जाती है और एनिमल्स जैसे डियर और बुल्स के डिपिक्शन के लिए फेमस है. साथ ही ज्योमेट्रिक डिजाइंस जैसे ग्रिड्स और डॉट्स भी हैं.
और कोई साइट?
हाँ, कसर देवी ऑल्सो इन अल्मोरा अपने पेट्रोग्लिफ्स या रॉक कार्विंग्स के लिए फेमस हैं, जिनके बारे में कुछ स्कॉलर्स का मानना है कि उनका एस्ट्रोनॉमिकल सिग्निफिकेंस हो सकता है.
Cool. What were these paintings like? और क्या मतलब था इनका?
दी आर्ट नेचुरल पिगमेंट्स जैसे रेड ऑकर और व्हाइट कावलिन यूज करती है. स्टाइल अक्सर एब्स्ट्रैक्ट और सिंपलिस्टिक है.
और थीम्स?
थीम्स उनकी लाइफ के बारे में है. आप ह्यूमन फिगर्स को हंटिंग या ग्रुप्स में डांस करते देख सकते हैं, वेरियस एनिमल्स और ज्योमेट्रिक पैटर्न्स जो स्पिरिचुअल आइडियाज रिप्रेजेंट कर सकते हैं.
अच्छा.
स्कॉलर्स लाइक V.S. वकांकर, जिन्हें फादर ऑफ इंडियन रॉक आर्ट कहा जाता है, उनका मानना था कि ये साइट्स प्री हिस्टोरिक ह्यूमंस का कॉग्निटिव डेवलपमेंट दिखाती हैं.
Right.
बिल्कुल. दे ऑल्सो प्रूव अर्ली ह्यूमन हैबिटेशन इन द हाई एल्टीट्यूड हिमालयाज, शोइंग देयर रिमार्केबल एडेप्टेशन. In conclusion, the prehistoric rock art of Uttarakhand offers indispensable insights to the cultural and historical trajectories of early communities in the Himalayan ecosystem.
लेकिन इन साइट्स को थ्रेट्स भी होंगे?
बिल्कुल. These sites face serious challenges from erosion and human interference, so preservation is key.
How are the themes in this art a direct reflection of their daily lives?
Quick hint. The focus on hunting scenes and animals like deer clearly shows that subsistence and their relationship with nature was a central part of their existence and their art.
What does the use of geometric patterns suggest?
Quick hint. It suggests a move beyond just representing reality. It points towards abstract thought and possibly spiritual or symbolic concepts that we can't fully understand today.
Why is Lakhudyar such a key site for this region?
Quick hint, its name, 1 lakh caves, and the variety of its art, both animal forms and geometric patterns, make it a central hub for understanding Uttarakhand's prehistory.
What's the biggest threat to this ancient art?
Quick hint, it's a double threat. both natural erosion over thousands of years and modern human interference like vandalism or pollution.
And how does this art prove adaptation to a tough environment?
Quick hint, the very existence of these complex artistic sites shows that early humans weren't just surviving in the Himalayas. They were thriving enough to create culture and art, which is a sign of a successful adaptation.
Practice saying this.
The rock art of Uttarakhand, found at sites like Lakudia, provides crucial evidence of the symbolic beliefs and high-altitude adaptations of Mesolithic communities. In short, the Himalayan caves were not just shelters, they were the first art galleries, telling stories of life, belief, and survival.
From the stories on cave walls to the stories told by objects. Our next question is about material culture and archaeology.
Question: Material culture and archaeology.
Broad micro-theme, describing the fundamental characteristics of material culture and critically examining its role in archaeology.
What if a simple clay pot could tell you about ancient trade routes, social status, and even religious beliefs?
That's fascinating.
That's the magic of material culture. Let's unpack it.
First, a simple introduction. Material culture refers to all the physical objects, resources, and spaces people create to define their culture.
सब कुछ.
हाँ, इसमें tools और pottery से लेकर architecture और art तक सब कुछ आता है. Archaeology इन्हीं material culture की study है to reconstruct past human behavior.
So how do archaeologists read these objects like a book?
It's all about interpretation through different lenses. First, technological advancements. एक crude Paleolithic stone tool से polished Neolithic axe का shift human skill और cognitive ability में एक major leap दिखाता है.
सही है.
Second, we use it for social and economic reconstruction. For example, South India में megalithic burials उनके varying grave goods के साथ social hierarchy suggest करते हैं.
Right?
South India में Roman coins का मिलना active international trade networks का solid proof है.
Or beliefs.
Third, it provides ideological reflection. Harappan civilization से mother goddess figurines उनके fertility cult में beliefs को reflect करती हैं.
Are there different ways to interpret these objects?
Yes, and this is where it gets interesting. Different theoretical approaches हैं.
जैसे?
Processual archaeology, led by Louis Binford, material culture को environment के लिए एक functional response मानती है.
इसका क्या मतलब?
मतलब, ये पूछती है, what was this tool used for? इसके contrast में, post-processual archaeology, with figures like Ian Hodder, argue करती है कि material culture symbolic है और ideology reflect करती है.
Right?
ये पूछती है, what did this object mean to the people who made it? In conclusion, by rigorously analyzing material culture, archaeologists bridge the past and present to understand the complexity and diversity of human societies.
एक simple सवाल. How can a simple tool reveal technological innovation?
Quick hint. The shift from a crude stone chopper to a polished, sharp flint tool shows a major leap in cognitive ability, planning, and manufacturing skill. It's not just a better tool, it's evidence of a smarter maker.
What makes Roman coins in India such powerful evidence of trade?
Quick hint, it's tangible proof of long-distance economic exchange. It goes beyond local production and directly connects two major civilizations of the ancient world.
What's the main difference between processual and post-processual archaeology?
Quick hint, think function versus meaning. Processual पूछता है what did this tool do, while post-processual पूछता है what did this object mean to them. One is about utility, the other is about symbolism.
Why are burials a good source for understanding social hierarchy?
Quick hint, the difference in grave goods, a simple pot in one grave versus elaborate gold ornaments in another, directly reflects the social status of the deceased in life.
And how does material culture help us understand societies without written records?
Quick hint, it's their only voice. The objects they left behind are the only clues we have to their technology, beliefs, and social life. It's history written in stone and clay.
Practice saying this aloud. Material culture provides the tangible data that archaeologists use to reconstruct technological, social, and ideological aspects of past societies.
In short, every object tells a story, and archaeology is the science of learning to read those stories.
Okay, we've talked about objects. Now let's see how they tell the story of a major shift in human life. Did people start settling down in the Mesolithic period? Let's investigate.
Question. Was Mesolithic culture the first step towards sedentary way of life? Illustrate your answer by citing suitable examples.
Broad micro theme, Mesolithic culture as a transitional phase, showcasing proto-domestication and semi-sedentary habitation patterns that preceded Neolithic full sedentarism.
For most of human history, हम nomads थे, हमेशा on the move. तो हमने roots डालना कब सोचा? Was the Mesolithic period the beginning of the end for the wandering lifestyle?
The Mesolithic culture जो इंडिया में 9000 to 2000 BCE के आसपास है, was definitely a crucial first step.
अच्छा.
While they were not fully sedentary जैसे Neolithic में थे, they showed clear signs of settling down. They were testing the waters.
What are those signs? Give me the evidence.
We see it in a few key areas. First, semi-sedentary habitation. Groups ने reliable water sources के पास seasonal camps लगाना शुरू किया.
Right.
Bagor in Rajasthan में semi-permanent settlements के evidence हैं, with structured huts and hearths.
Or tools.
Second, microlithic technology. ये specialized small sharp stone tools थे. इन्होंने hunting और plant processing को बहुत efficient बना दिया, जिससे लोग अपने local environment को better exploit कर पाते थे और एक जगह ज़्यादा देर रुक सकते थे.
Right.
Third, हम देखते हैं proto-domestication. ये बहुत बड़ा है। हमें एनिमल डोमेस्टिकेशन के अर्लीस्ट साइंस मिलते हैं, डॉग्स, गोट्स, शीप।
Wow.
अर्ली लेवल्स ऑफ मेहरगढ़ इन बलूचिस्तान में तो बार्ली और वीट की अर्ली कल्टीवेशन भी दिखती है।
So they were storing food too. That seems like a big step towards staying put.
Exactly. We find evidence of food storage in the form of pits at sites like Langnaj in Gujarat.
अच्छा,
ये फ्यूचर के लिए प्लानिंग और डेली फॉरेजिंग पर कम डिपेंडेंस दिखाता है। फाइनली, दिस इज एविडेंस ऑफ सोशल कोहेजन।
जैसे
भीमबेटका इन मध्य प्रदेश के रॉक शेल्टर्स में कम्युनल एक्टिविटीज जैसे ग्रुप हंटिंग और डाउंसिंग दिखती हैं, जो फिक्स सेटलमेंट्स डेवलप करने के लिए जरूरी हैं।
लेकिन इसमें एक क्रिटिकल पॉइंट भी होगा।
हाँ, वी मस्ट बी क्रिटिकल। उनके सेटलमेंट्स अक्सर सीजनल थे और वो अभी भी हंटिंग एंड गैदरिंग पर हेवीली रिलाई करते थे। तो ये एक ट्रांजिशन था, फाइनल डेस्टिनेशन नहीं।
Okay.
In conclusion, the Mesolithic culture was undeniably a crucial step towards sedentary life, bridging the nomadic Paleolithic lifestyle and the settled agricultural patterns of the Neolithic.
What is the single best piece of evidence for semi-sedentarism at Bagur?
For a hint, the presence of structured, semi-permanent huts and domesticated animal remains together in one place. It's a package deal, showing they were staying put.
Why are microliths considered a technological key to a more settled life?
Quick hint, they represent efficiency. Better tools meant a more reliable food supply from the local environment, which in turn reduced the need to constantly move.
How do storage pits at Lankanaj change the game?
Quick hint, storing food means planning for the future. It's a fundamental shift from the hand-to-mouth existence of pure foragers and a key psychological step towards sedentism.
Why is Mehergarh so important in this story?
Quick hint, it shows the complete package in its very early stages. Animal domestication and plant cultivation, the two pillars of the coming Neolithic revolution.
And how does the art at Bhimbetka support the idea of growing social cohesion?
Quick hint, the paintings depict groups of people hunting and dancing together. This illustrates a community identity and cooperation essential for the social fabric of a settled life.
Practice this. Mesolithic culture was the critical transitional phase, establishing semi-sedentary patterns and proto-domestication, which were the necessary precursors for full Neolithic sedentism.
In short, the Mesolithic people weren't fully settled, but they were the first to seriously test the waters of a sedentary lifestyle.
From the first steps towards settlement, let's jump to one of the biggest settlements of the ancient world. Next question. Was the Indus Valley the first big civilization?
Phoenician. Indus Valley was the first settlement of the big civilization.
Comment critically.
Broad micro-theme. The chronological and historical placement of the Indus Valley civilization, IVC, in relation to precursor cultures and global ancient civilizations. Harappa Mohenjo-daro. ये नाम epic लगते हैं. We often hear the Indus Valley was the cradle of civilization, but was it really the first big one? Time for a critical look, दोस्त.
To introduce this, the IVC, जो 2500 और 1900 BCE के बीच flourish हुई, was definitely one of the world's earliest urban civilizations, alongside Mesopotamia and Egypt.
Right.
It was certainly the first large-scale urban system in South Asia.
Okay, so what's the argument for it being the first big civilization?
The arguments are strong. First, its urban planning. उस टाइम पर unparalleled थी.
सही है.
Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Dholavira में grid layouts, public wells और advanced drainage systems थे, जो हजारों साल बाद कई यूरोपियन सिटी से बेहतर थे.
Right.
Second, its technological and economic sophistication. They used standardized weights and measures और उनके trade networks मेसोपोटामिया तक पहुंचते थे.
Okay.
And third, उनका एक proto-state structure था, जिसका अंदाजा bricks, seals और city planning की uniformity से लगता है. Plus, an undeciphered written script.
Sounds convincing. So, what's the catch? Why is the first claim debated?
This is the critical part of the question. दो main points है for a critical assessment. First, it had precursor settlements.
मतलब?
IVC अचानक से नहीं आ गई. Sites like Mehergarh, dating to 7000 BCE, show the long, slow development of agriculture and village life that laid the foundation for the IVC.
अच्छा, तो ये culmination थी.
Exactly. It was a culmination of thousands of years of local development, not a sudden beginning. Second, we must consider the global context.
Right.
मेसोपोटामिया की civilization in modern Iraq 3100 BCE के आसपास शुरू हुई और ancient Egypt 3000 BCE के आसपास. दोनों chronologically IVC के mature phase से older है.
तो IVC उनके साथ थी, उससे पहले नहीं.
बिल्कुल. So the IVC was contemporaneous with them, a contemporary, not an antecedent. It was one of the first, but not the first globally.
Okay, that makes sense.
So in conclusion, while the Indus Valley civilization was undoubtedly the first large-scale urban civilization in South Asia, it was part of a broader global emergence of civilizations and grew from deep indigenous roots within the subcontinent.
When answering why is it crucial to mention Mehergarh?
Quick hint, Mehergarh provides the evidence of deep indigenous roots. It shows the IVC was an evolution, not an import, which is a key part of a critical analysis.
How do you balance the South Asia versus global context?
Quick hint, state clearly that it was the first in South Asia but contemporaneous with others globally. This shows nuance and a wider perspective.
What specific feature of Mohenjo-daro best supports the big civilization argument?
Quick hint, the Great Bath. It's not just a structure. It implies large-scale public works, social organization, and shared ritual activity, all hallmarks of a complex civilization.
Why is the lack of huge palaces like in Egypt a point of debate?
Quick hint, it challenges our definition of a state. It makes us question whether the IVC had kings and centralized power in the same way as Egypt or Mesopotamia, or if they had a different, more collective form of governance.
What does civilizational continuum mean in this context?
Quick hint. It means the IVC didn't just vanish. Its cultural traits, like certain religious symbols or craft techniques, continued in later Indian cultures, showing it was part of a long, unbroken story.
Practice this sentence. While the IVC was the first major urban civilization in South Asia, it emerged from indigenous precursors like Mehergarh and was contemporaneous with other great ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt.
In short, the IVC was a giant, but it stood on the shoulders of earlier cultures in the subcontinent and had neighbors of equal stature on the world stage.
Let's try equally fascinating way of life. Next up, the pit dwellers.
Question. Pit dwellers of Kashmir.
Broad micro theme, archaeological and cultural characteristics of Neolithic pit-dwelling communities in Kashmir.
Living in a pit sounds pretty basic, right?
हाँ,
But for the Neolithic people of Kashmir, it was a genius adaptation to a harsh, cold climate. Let's dig into the world of the pit dwellers.
to start, the term pit dwellers उन prehistoric communities को refer करता है जो कश्मीर में Neolithic period around 3000-1500 BCE में रहती थी.
Okay.
They lived in subterranean और semi-subterranean houses और main archaeological sites जैसे बुरजा होम, गुफक्रिल और बेगागुंड हमें उनकी unique lives की clear picture देती हैं.
So what were these pit houses like?
At Burza home, which is near modern Srinagar, archaeologists को oval या circular pits मिले हैं जो जमीन में 3 to 4 meters deep खोदे गए थे.
Wow.
ये डिजाइन freezing winters के against amazing natural insulation provide करता था.
Smart.
उनके साइड में स्टेप्स आने के लिए और दीवारों पर मिट्टी का प्लास्टर था. At Gufkril, the pits were smaller and shallower और कई में अंदर हार्ट्स थे, suggesting कि वो खराब मौसम में अंदर खाना बनाते थे.
Smart. What else did they find? What was their culture like?
उनका मटेरियल कल्चर काफी एडवांस था. They used polished stone tools जैसे axes और chisels और उन्होंने distinctive handmade grey और red pottery बनाई.
और उनका खाना?
उनकी subsistence एक mixed economy थी. They practiced agriculture, growing wheat, barley and lentils, but also supplemented it with hunting and fishing.
Rituals के बारे में कुछ?
हाँ, उनके रिचुअल्स बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग थे. बुरजा होम में ह्यूमंस और एनिमल्स जैसे डॉग्स के यूनिक बरियल्स मिले हैं एक साथ.
That is very interesting.
ये एनिमल्स के साथ एक स्पेशल बॉन्ड और अर्ली रिलीजियस बिलीफ्स सजेस्ट करता है. In conclusion, the pit dwelling tradition is significant because it marks a crucial transition from a nomadic to a settled way of life in a challenging environment.
Right.
उनके टूल्स की सेंट्रल एशियन कल्चर से सिमिलैरिटी एंशिएंट ट्रेड एंड कम्युनिकेशन नेटवर्क्स की तरफ भी हिंट करती है.
Why was digging a pit a smart way to live in Kashmir?
Quick hint. Natural insulation. The earth itself protects from the extreme cold in winter and keeps it cool in summer. It's a simple but highly effective form of climate control.
What does the combination of farming tools and hunting tools tell us about their economy?
Quick hint. It shows a mixed economy. They weren't fully reliant on agriculture yet. They blended the old way of life, hunting, with the new, farming, for food security.
What is the significance of the human and animal burials found together?
Quick hint. It suggests a special relationship with animals, possibly as beloved companions, spirit guides, or as part of a ritual belief system we don't fully understand. It's a very unique practice.
What makes Burza home the most important pit dweller site?
Quick hint. The depth and structure of its pits, along with the rich artifact collection and unique burials, provide the most detailed and complete picture of this unique lifestyle.
And how do these pit dwellings represent the shift to a sedentary life?
Quick hint. You don't invest the time and energy to dig a 4-meter deep house if you plan on moving next season. It's a clear sign of commitment to a place and a settled lifestyle.
Practice saying this. The Neolithic pit dwellers of Kashmir, particularly at Burza home, demonstrated remarkable adaptation to a cold climate through their unique subterranean architecture and a mixed agricultural hunting economy.
In short, Kashmir's pit dwellers weren't just living in holes, they were innovative architects, creating climate-controlled homes that allowed them to settle in a challenging environment.
Stones raised towards the sky. Our next question takes us to the megalithic tradition, with a special focus on Northeast India.
Question. Make a critical appraisal of megalithic tradition in India, with special reference to Northeast India.
Broad micro theme. Characteristics, significance, and challenges related to the megalithic tradition in India, focusing on Northeast India.
Giant stone monuments, standing silent for thousands of years. We're talking about megaliths. They're found all over India, but the tradition in the Northeast is unique, or, in some cases, even alive today. Let's explore this.
As an introduction, the megalithic tradition involves building monuments from large, rough blocks of stone. अक्सर funerals या commemorative rituals के लिए.
Okay.
इंडिया में ये tradition mostly Iron Age around 1000 BCE से date की जाती है. These structures give us huge insights into early societal complexity, beliefs, and social organization.
So what are the common types of megaliths in India?
In South and West India, हम अक्सर dolmens and cyst burials देखते हैं जो basically stone burial chambers होते हैं.
अच्छा.
Famous sites like Adijanulur in Tamil Nadu में rich grave goods जैसे pottery और iron weapons अंदर मिले, indicating a strong belief in the afterlife.
Or?
We also see menhirs, which are single upright stones, and cairns, which are piles of stones often used as memorials or markers.
Okay, now let's zoom into the Northeast. How is the tradition different there?
This is the special reference part. Northeast India में states like Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, the tradition is closely integrated with the living socio-religious life of tribal communities.
Acha, a living tradition.
Huh. The megaliths there are predominantly menhirs and dolmens, but they are often erected as commemorative monuments to honor great leaders, mark important events, or celebrate a feast of merit, not just as tombs.
Right.
The practice is deeply tied to ancestor worship and requires huge collective labor, which shows strong community identity. For example, the Khasi and Jayantia tribes of Meghalaya still have a living megalithic tradition.
So, what's the critical appraisal part? What are the challenges in studying them?
The main challenge is regional bias in research. South Indian megaliths को North East के megaliths से कहीं ज़्यादा attention मिली है archaeologists से. Also, many Northeast sites remote हैं और difficult terrain की वजह से unexplored है. इसका मतलब है कि हमारी all India megalithic tradition की understanding incomplete और skewed है.
सही बात है.
In conclusion, the megalithic tradition showcases the complexity of early Indian societies. But a full picture पाने के लिए, we need to address the regional bias and increase exploration in the Northeast, where the tradition is a living heritage.
What's the key difference between a South Indian and a Northeast Indian megalith?
Quick hint, think tomb versus trophy. Southern megaliths are often primarily funerary, for the dead. Northeastern ones are often commemorative, celebrating a person's achievements in life.
How do megaliths prove social complexity?
Quick hint, you can't move multi-ton stones by yourself. It requires leadership planning and a large group of people working together, all signs of an organized society.
Why is the link to living tribes in the Northeast so important?
Quick hint, it provides a direct ethnographic parallel. We can ask the people themselves what these stones mean, which is a rare opportunity in archaeology. It's a living tradition, not just a dead monument.
What does the presence of iron tools in megalithic sites signify?
Quick hint, it shows these societies were technologically advanced and part of the broader Iron Age. They had the tools needed to quarry and shape these massive stones.
What is the biggest obstacle to a complete understanding of Indian megaliths?
Quick hint, the regional bias in research. We have a very detailed map of the South, but huge blank spots in the Northeast, leading to a skewed perspective.
Now, practicing this. While the megalithic tradition was widespread in India, the Northeast is unique for its living tradition of commemorative megaliths, which highlights ancestor worship and community identity, though the region remains under-researched.
In short, megaliths are not just old stones. They are monuments to community, belief, and memory. And in the Northeast, that memory is still alive.
From the hills of the Northeast to the coast of Gujarat, a region that has been a hub of trade for millennia. Let's look at its proto-history.
Question. Describe briefly the proto-history of Gujarat. Discuss the significance of Gujarat's proto-history in international trade.
Broad micro-theme, proto-history of Gujarat, emphasizing its role in international trade during the Harappan and post-Harappan phases.
गुजरात आज ट्रेड और इंडस्ट्री का पावर हाउस है. But ये कहानी नई नहीं है दोस्त. It started thousands of years ago in the proto-historic period. Let's see how ancient Gujarat became a global trade hotspot.
First, let's define our terms. Proto-history वो period है between prehistory and history, जहां हमारे पास आर्कियोलॉजिकल एविडेंस है पर लिखे हुए रिकॉर्ड्स या तो कम है या हम पढ़ नहीं सकते.
Right.
गुजरात में ये मेनली हरप्पन सिविलाइजेशन को कवर करता है फ्रॉम अबाउट 1600 BCE ऑनवर्ड्स. गुजरात स्ट्रेटेजिक कोस्टल लोकेशन उसके अर्ली अर्बनाइजेशन और ट्रेड की थी.
So what were the key sites and developments?
गुजरात वाज अ मेजर प्रोविंस ऑफ द इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन. हमें की साइट्स मिलती हैं जैसे धोलावीरा, जो अपने इनक्रेडिबल अर्बन प्लानिंग और 3-part सिटी लेआउट के लिए फेमस है.
और उसके वाटर मैनेजमेंट सिस्टम्स भी?
बिल्कुल. एंड ऑफ कोर्स लोथल, व्हिच इज वर्ल्ड फेमस फॉर इट्स एक्सकवेटेड डॉकयार्ड, द मोस्ट डायरेक्ट एंड क्लियर साइन ऑफ मैरिटाइम ट्रेड.
Right.
में आईवीसी सिटीज के डिक्लाइन के बाद अदर कल्चर्स जैसे मालवा और जोरवे कल्चर्स गुजरात में एमर्ज हुई, कंटिन्यूइंग रीजनल ट्रेड ट्रेडिशंस.
Okay, let's focus on the international trade. What was its significance?
This is the most crucial part of the answer. गुजरात's long coastline आईवीसी के लिए बाकी दुनिया का गेटवे था.
Right, through the sea.
हाँ, the dockyard at Lothal is the smoking gun, undeniable proof of organized, large-scale maritime trade with Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, and the Persian Gulf.
अच्छा.
Mesopotamian text में मेलोहा नाम के लैंड से रेगुलर ट्रेड का मेंशन है, जिसे ज्यादातर स्कॉलर्स हरप्पन रीजन मानते हैं, और गुजरात उसका मेन पोर्ट था.
What were they trading?
गुजरात क्राफ्ट स्पेशलाइजेशन का एक मेजर सेंटर बन गया. साइट्स लाइक नागेश्वर एंड लोथल बीड मेकिंग के लिए फेमस थे.
अच्छा.
वो कार्नेलियन, एगेट और स्टेयरटाइट से ब्यूटीफुल ऑर्नामेंट्स बनाते थे, जिनकी वेस्ट में हाई डिमांड थी. वो शेल ऑब्जेक्ट्स, टेक्सटाइल्स, कॉटन और पॉटरी भी ट्रेड करते थे.
तो इस ट्रेड से उन्हें काफी फायदा हुआ?
डेफिनेटली. दिस ट्रेड बेस्ड प्रॉस्पेरिटी ने धौलावीरा और लोथल जैसे सोफिस्टिकेटेड सिटीज के ग्रोथ को डायरेक्टली फंड किया. In conclusion, the proto-history of Gujarat shows a powerful combination of geography and innovation, establishing it as a central player in the ancient global trade network.
And cementing a legacy of commerce that continues to this day.
What single discovery at Lothal makes it so important for trade history?
Quick hint. The dockyard. It is the most direct and undeniable piece of archaeological evidence for large-scale, organized maritime trade in the ancient world.
How did geography give Gujarat an advantage?
Quick hint. Its long coastline and natural harbors on the Arabian Sea made it the perfect launchpad for sea trade to the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia.
What is Meluha and why does it matter?
Quick hint. It's the name found in Mesopotamian cuneiform texts for a trading partner. Finding Harappan seals in Mesopotamia and Mesopotamian objects in Harappan sites strongly suggests Meluha was the Indus region, and the name in their texts is proof from their side.
What is craft specialization in bead making? Tell us about the economy.
Quick hint, it shows they weren't just producing for themselves. They were mass-producing high-quality goods specifically for export, which indicates a sophisticated, market-driven economy.
How did trade lead to urbanization in Dholavira?
Quick hint, trade brings wealth and resources. This wealth funded the complex infrastructure, like Dholavira's incredible water reservoirs, and supported a large, non-agricultural population of traders and artisans, which are the key ingredients for a city.
Practice this. Gujarat's proto-history is defined by its role as a maritime trade hub during the Harappan period, with sites like Lothal and its dockyard providing clear evidence of international trade with Mesopotamia.
In short, ancient Gujarat was the original gateway of India, connecting the subcontinent to the global economy thousands of years ago.
Next question. Cultural diversity and multiculturalism.
Broad micro-theme, defining and assessing the significance and challenges of cultural diversity and multiculturalism as socio-political frameworks.
India is a land of incredible diversity. But what's the difference between just having diversity and actively promoting it through multiculturalism? Let's break down this very relevant concept.
It's a key distinction. Cultural diversity is the simple demographic fact that different cultural, ethnic, linguistic and religious groups एक society में coexist करते हैं.
Okay, so ये बस एक fact है.
हाँ, it's just a description of reality. Multiculturalism, on the other hand, एक policy या political ideology है, जो इस diversity को actively recognize, value और promote करती है.
अच्छा.
It advocates for the equal and respected coexistence of different cultures.
So what are the benefits of multiculturalism?
It enriches society in many ways. It fosters creativity and innovation by bringing in varied perspectives and ideas.
सही है.
It promotes social harmony and mutual respect when managed well. Economically, it can attract global talent and create vibrant markets. और ये cultural heritage, जैसे endangered languages or traditions, को preserve करने में help करता है.
कोई example?
A country like Singapore has specific policies to promote racial and religious harmony, which is a good example.
It sounds great, but are there challenges? A critical assessment must look at the problems too.
Absolutely. The critical assessment points to several challenges. First, there can be identity conflicts.
मतलब?
Minority groups can struggle to balance their cultural traditions with the need for integration into the larger society. हम ये फ्रांस में public spaces में हिजाब जैसे religious symbols पर debates में देखते हैं.
Right.
Second, social fragmentation. Critics argue कि group identity पर बहुत ज़्यादा emphasize से separate communities बन सकती हैं जो आपस में interact नहीं करती हैं, जिससे national unity कमज़ोर होती है.
Okay. और?
Third, multicultural policies don't automatically erase structural inequality. For instance, Australia's Aboriginal population, जैसे indigenous communities का marginalization, multicultural policies के बावजूद चलता रहता है.
Right.
In conclusion, a comprehensive approach that integrates education, economic opportunity, and policy is needed to manage these challenges and ensure that diversity remains a collective strength.
What's the simplest way to explain the difference between diversity and multiculturalism?
Quick hint, diversity is the ingredients in the salad. Multiculturalism is the philosophy that says every ingredient is valuable and should be tasted and seen, not blended into one single flavor.
How does multiculturalism boost an economy?
Quick hint. It creates a welcoming environment for skilled immigrants and international businesses, leading to a larger talent pool, more innovation, and more investment.
What is the core of the identity conflict challenge?
Quick hint. It's the tension between fitting in with the majority culture and staying true to one's own heritage, and finding a balance that works for both the individual and society.
Why isn't a multiculturalism policy enough to solve inequality?
Quick hint. Policy is about recognition and rights. Inequality is often rooted in deep historical and economic structures that policy alone can't fix, without active intervention in education, housing, and employment.
How does Singapore exemplify a multicultural policy?
Quick hint. Through its official recognition of 4 languages, its public holidays for different religions, and its public policies designed to ensure representation and harmony among its Chinese, Malay, and Indian populations.
Practicing this. While cultural diversity is the existence of multiple cultures, multiculturalism is the active policy of recognizing and promoting this diversity, which enriches society, but also faces challenges like identity conflicts and structural inequality.
In short, multiculturalism is the hard work of making sure a diverse society is also a fair and harmonious one.
Let's travel back in time again to the Upper Paleolithic period. What was life like for the first modern humans in India?
Question. Give the distribution and characteristic features of Upper Paleolithic culture in India.
Broad micro-theme. Geographical extent and cultural attributes of the Upper Paleolithic culture in India.
We're talking about the era of the first modern humans, Homo sapiens, in India. This period, roughly from 40,000 to 10,000 BCE, was a time of huge change and innovation. So where did they live and what made their culture so special?
Let's start with an introduction. The Upper Paleolithic culture was transformative. It's marked by major technological advancements in tool making and the first clear evidence of artistic and symbolic expression in the subcontinent.
So, where are the sites found? Were they all over India?
Yes, the distribution is very wide, which shows their incredible adaptability to different environments.
Acha.
In the north, we have sites in the Sohan and Bilan valleys. In central India, the big one is the Bhimbetka rock shelters in Madhya Pradesh.
Right, Bhimbetka.
In the south, the Kurnool caves in Andhra Pradesh are a critical site. और हमें वेस्ट में गुजरात और ईस्ट में ओडिशा और झारखंड में भी साइट्स मिलती हैं.
They were everywhere.
And what are the characteristic features? What did they create?
The first defining feature is their tool technology. They moved to specialized blade and burin tools.
Okay.
ये long, thin, parallel-sided blades थे, जो एक prepared core से निकाले जाते थे. Techniques जैसे pressure flaking बहुत advanced थी और sharp, efficient tools produce करती थी.
और एक बड़ा innovation था.
हाँ, that they also started making bone tools like harpoons, needles and awls.
And this is when art begins, right? Exactly. The other key feature is art and symbolism. भीमबेटका की रॉक आर्ट के ओरिजिन्स इस पीरियड में हैं with paintings of animals, human figures and geometric patterns.
अच्छा.
ये symbolic thinking और communication के dawn को रिफ्लेक्ट करता है. एक और अमेजिंग डिस्कवरी इस पीरियड से है engraved ostrich egg shells, जो पटने जैसे साइट्स पर मिली हैं, which points to the creation of portable art and ornaments.
Interesting.
In conclusion, the Upper Paleolithic culture in India represents a critical phase of human cognitive and cultural evolution, marked by sophisticated technology, adaptation to diverse zones, and the birth of symbolic expression which paved the way for the later Mesolithic cultures.
What is the single biggest technological leap of the Upper Paleolithic?
Quick hint: the shift from general-purpose flake tools to a specialized, efficient blade and burin industry. It's like going from a simple hammer to a full toolkit with screwdrivers and wrenches. It's about precision.
Why are the Kurnool caves so important for this period?
Quick hint: they provide the best evidence for the widespread use of a new material, bone. The discovery of a variety of well-made bone tools there is a game changer.
What does the rock art at Bhimbetka tell us about their minds?
Quick hint: it shows they were capable of abstract thought. They weren't just making tools to survive. They were creating symbols to express ideas about their world, their beliefs, and their stories.
How did their wide geographical distribution show adaptability?
Quick hint: it proves they were smart and flexible enough to survive in very different environments, from the cold river valleys of the north to the rocky shelters of central India and the limestone caves of the south.
What is an osteodontocheratic culture?
Quick hint: it's a fancy term for a culture that makes tools from bone, osteo, teeth, donto, and horn, keratic. The Upper Paleolithic saw the first real emergence of this technology in India.
Practice saying this. The Upper Paleolithic in India is characterized by a wide geographical distribution, a specialized blade and burin tool technology, and the emergence of symbolic art as seen at Bhimbetka and in ostrich eggshell engravings.
In short, the Upper Paleolithic was the age when Homo sapiens in India truly began to innovate, creating not just better tools, but also the very first art.
We've talked about the Indus Valley civilization a few times. Now let's tackle a huge question head on. Where did it actually come from?
Question: critically discuss the origin of Indus Valley civilization. Mention the evidences of its endogenous origin from the pre-Harappan sites.
Broad micro theme. Theories and archaeological evidence supporting the endogenous origin of the Indus Valley civilization, IVC, from indigenous pre-Harappan cultures.
The origin of the mighty IVC has been a hot debate for a century. Was it an import brought by outsiders? Or did it grow right here in the subcontinent? This is the classic endogenous versus exogenous debate.
Exactly. The old theory was an exogenous origin, which suggested that ideas or even people from the older Mesopotamian civilization sparked the IVC.
Right.
This theory is now largely discredited. The dominant theory today, backed by overwhelming evidence, is an endogenous origin.
मतलब यहीं से शुरू हुई.
This theory posits that the IVC evolved internally and gradually from the earlier local Neolithic and Chalcolithic cultures of the region.
Okay, so let's focus on that. What is the evidence for this local endogenous origin?
The evidence comes from a series of pre-Harappan sites that show a clear, gradual development from small villages to large cities.
Right.
The superstar site here is Mehergarh in Balochistan, which dates back to 7000 BCE.
4000 BCE.
Yes. Mehergarh shows the slow step-by-step evolution of agriculture from barley to wheat, animal domestication, and crafts like pottery and bead making that became the foundation of the IVC.
तो एक continuous story है.
Bilkul. A continuous story over thousands of years.
Any other sites that show this transition?
Yes, many. Amri in Sindh shows pottery styles that lead directly into the mature Harappan period, plus early proto-urban features like fortification walls and drainage.
Okay.
Kot Diji, also in Sindh, had a massive defensive wall and well-planned settlements that were a direct precursor to Harappan cities.
Right.
And Kalibangan in Rajasthan had a pre-Harappan settlement with ploughed field patterns and proto-Harappan pottery. Even great Harappan cities like Dholavira and Rakhi Ghari have pre-Harappan layers beneath them.
जिसका मतलब है कि वो सिंस स्पॉट पर पहले के सेटलमेंट से ही ग्रो हुए हैं.
Precisely.
So it's a story of continuity.
Yes, we see cultural and technological continuity in pottery styles, in urban planning ideas that start small and get more complex, and in the agrarian economy that was built over millennia at sites like Mehergarh and Kalibangan.
Right.
In conclusion, the origin of the IVC is best understood as a complex process of endogenous cultural evolution rooted entirely in the Indian subcontinent.
तो मेसोपोटामिया से ट्रेड का रोल?
While trade with Mesopotamia existed, it was a trade between equals and wasn't the cause of urbanization in India. The evidence from pre-Harappan sites confirms this gradual, indigenous journey to civilization.
What does endogenous mean in this context?
Quick hint, it means growing from within. It's the idea that the civilization developed locally, using its own innovations and building on its own long history rather than being an idea imported from outside.
Why is Mehergarh the most critical piece of evidence for this theory?
Quick hint, it's incredible time depth. It shows a continuous cultural sequence for thousands of years before the IVC, proving that all the building blocks of civilization, farming, herding, crafts, were already there and evolving locally.
How does the evidence from Kalibangan's plowed fields support the endogenous theory?
Quick hint, it shows that sophisticated agricultural techniques, which were absolutely necessary to feed large urban populations, were developed locally long before the great cities were built.
What's the main weakness of the old exogenous or Mesopotamian influence theory?
Quick hint, while there was trade, the core features of the IVC, its unique script, its distinct urban planning, its seals, and its main cultural traits are completely different and have no direct parallels in Mesopotamia.
How can you structure this answer to be most effective?
Quick hint. First, briefly introduce the two competing theories, endogenous versus exogenous, then dedicate the bulk of the answer to providing specific archaeological evidence from pre-Harappan sites like Mehergarh, Amri, and Kalibangan to support the stronger endogenous argument.
Practice saying this. The Indus Valley civilization's origin is overwhelmingly supported by evidence of endogenous evolution from pre-Harappan sites, like Mehergarh, which demonstrate a long continuity of agricultural and technological development within the subcontinent.
In short, the IVC wasn't an import. It was homegrown, the result of thousands of years of slow and steady progress by the people of the Indian subcontinent.
From the origins of one civilization, let's look at the features of a whole new era of human history, the Neolithic.
Question. Discuss the characteristic features of Neolithic culture in India.
Broad micro-theme. The revolutionary shift from hunting-gathering to food production during the Neolithic period in India.
The Neolithic period wasn't just about better stone tools. It was a revolution that changed humanity forever.
The invention of farming.
Exactly. A completely new way of life. So what were the defining features of this game-changing era in India?
As an introduction, the Neolithic or New Stone Age is defined by the shift from a food-gathering economy to a food-producing one.
Right.
It was first recognized in India by Captain Meadows Taylor in 1842, when he found a polished stone axe.
This shift led to a cascade of other changes.
Okay, a polished stone axe. Let's start with the technology. What was new?
The tools are the first key feature. Unlike the chipped tools of the Paleolithic, Neolithic tools were ground and polished, making them smoother, stronger, and more effective.
Acha, we see specialized tools like the Neolithic celt, an axe head, chisels for carpentry, and ring stones, which were used as weights for digging sticks in farming.
Pottery bhi isi time aayi.
They also invented pottery for storing grains and liquids, and we have evidence of spinning and weaving of cotton and wool.
And the biggest change was in how they got their food, right?
Absolutely. The second and most important feature is subsistence and settlement patterns. This is the beginning of settled agriculture.
Right.
They cultivated crops like ragi, cotton, rice, wheat, and barley. They also domesticated animals like cattle, sheep, and goats.
जिससे nomadic life से settled life की तरफ shift हुआ.
Bilkul. A fundamental shift from a nomadic to a sedentary or settled lifestyle, with people living in permanent villages with circular or rectangular houses made of mud and reed.
What about their beliefs in social life?
That's the third key feature. We see the start of intentional disposal of the dead, with elaborate burials, sometimes in large urns under the house floor.
Interesting.
ये ritual practices और afterlife में belief का development दिखाता है. And this Neolithic culture had significant regional variations.
जैसे?
For example, in Burzahom in Kashmir, they adapted to the cold with unique pit dwellings. In Mehergarh, we see the earliest evidence of farming in South Asia.
और South में?
And in the south, at sites like Piklihal, we find unique ash mounds from burnt cow dung, suggesting a distinct cattle-centric ritual.
Right.
In conclusion, the Neolithic period was a foundational era in Indian history. This transformative period, with its technological evolution, agricultural revolution, and regional adaptations, set the stage for the development of complex societies like the Harappan civilization.
What is the single most important characteristic of the Neolithic period?
Quick hint, the shift from food gathering to food production. Everything else, settled life, new tools, population growth, pottery, stems from this single revolutionary change.
Why is polishing a stone tool such a big deal?
Quick hint, it creates a more durable and efficient cutting edge. It's a technological refinement that makes tasks like clearing forests for agriculture much easier and more effective.
How do permanent houses in villages suggest the change in social structure? Quick hint, it shows a move towards a community-based, settled lifestyle. People had to cooperate and live together year-round, which requires more complex social rules than a small, mobile hunter-gatherer band.
What are the ash mounds of South India, like at Piklihal? Tell us.
Quick hint, they suggest a culture where cattle were extremely important, not just for food, but also for ritual purposes. It points to a distinct regional belief system centered around pastoralism.
Why is Kiran and Bihar unique among Neolithic sites?
Quick hint, because of its high frequency of bone and antler tools. This shows a specialized local adaptation where people resourcefully use the materials most abundant in their local riverine environment to create a unique toolkit.
Practice this sentence. The Neolithic culture in India is defined by three key features: polished stone tools, the shift to agriculture and settled life, and significant regional variations like the pit dwellings of Burzahom and ash mounds of Pickley Hall.
In short, the Neolithic revolution was when we stopped just finding our food and started making it, changing the course of human history forever.
We've talked about all these amazing discoveries. Now let's talk about the people who made them. We'll start with a giant in the field, V.N. Misra.
Question. Discuss the contributions of V.N. Misra to archaeological anthropology in India.
Broad microtheme. V.N. Misra's monumental role in Indian archaeological anthropology and prehistory.
Behind every great discovery is a great mind. Dr. Vishnu Narayan Misra was one of those minds, a renowned archaeologist who fundamentally shaped our understanding of prehistoric India. So what were his major contributions?
Let's start with an introduction. Dr. Misra's work was instrumental in interpreting India's prehistoric past. He shifted the focus from just collecting tools to understanding how early humans interacted with their environment and how their cultures evolved over time.
Where did he do his most important work?
His pioneering research was in the Thar Desert of Rajasthan. His excavations at sites like Bagor and Tilwara were absolute game changers for understanding Mesolithic and Chalcolithic cultures.
Acha.
At Bagor, which is one of the best excavated Mesolithic sites in India, he found evidence of microlithic tools, domesticated animals, and semi-permanent settlements, giving us a clear picture of life in transition.
भीमबेटका में भी उनका काम था.
He also did extensive work at the Bhimbetka rock shelters, helping to uncover the long sequence of art and stone tools that showed the continuity of human occupation there for thousands of years.
What made his approach different or special?
That was his methodological and paleo-environmental focus. This is his key contribution.
मतलब?
He championed an interdisciplinary approach, integrating geology, botany, and zoology into his archaeological research.
सिर्फ tools पर focus नहीं किया.
No, he didn't just look at the tools, he looked at the ancient world they were used in. He famously reconstructed ancient climate patterns in the Thar Desert by studying the pollen and sediment layers in salt lakes.
Wow.
जिसे पता चला कि environment time के साथ कैसे बदला और humans ने कैसे adapt किया. He also meticulously documented the technological transitions from the lower to the upper Paleolithic across India through his extensive explorations.
Right.
In conclusion, V.N. Mishra's systematic and holistic approach, integrating ecological context with material culture, defined modern Indian archaeological anthropology. His legacy of looking at the big picture endures.
What is V.N. Misra's single most famous excavation site?
Quick hint, Bagor in Rajasthan. It's the classic example of his work on Mesolithic life, early domestication, and human adaptation to an arid environment.
What does interdisciplinary approach mean in his context?
Quick hint, it means he didn't just dig for artifacts. He worked with geologists to understand the soil, botanists to identify ancient plants, and zoologists for animal bones, creating a complete 360-degree picture of the past.
How did studying salt lakes help him understand prehistory?
Quick hint, the layers of sediment and pollen in the lake beds acted like a climate archive. They allowed him to reconstruct ancient rainfall patterns and understand the environment people were living in and adapting to.
What was his key contribution at Bhimbetka?
Quick hint, his work there helped demonstrate the incredible time depth and continuity of human art and culture, showing a sequence spanning multiple prehistoric phases in a single location.
Why is his focus on human-environment interactions so relevant today?
Quick hint, because he showed how past climate change shaped human societies, which offers valuable lessons for us as we face our own climate crisis. It shows that adaptation is key.
Practice this. V.N. Mishra's primary contribution was his interdisciplinary and paleo-environmental approach, best exemplified by his work at Bagor and Bhimbetka, which linked cultural evolution directly to environmental change.
In short, V.N. Mishra taught us that to understand the people of the past, you have to understand the world they lived in.
From one great archaeologist to the man known as the father of Indian prehistory. Next up, Robert Bruce Foote.
Question. Contributions of Robert Bruce Foote to Indian archaeology.
Broad microtheme. Pioneering contributions of Robert Bruce Foote to Indian archaeology and prehistory.
Every field has a beginning, a moment when it all starts. For Indian prehistory, that moment came in 1863 thanks to a geologist named Robert Bruce Foote. Let's look at his legacy.
As an introduction, Robert Bruce Foote, a British geologist with the Geological Survey of India, is rightly called the father of Indian prehistory.
Acha.
His work single-handedly put India on the global map of prehistoric studies.
What was his most famous discovery?
His landmark discovery was a Paleolithic hand axe that he found at Pallavaram, near modern-day Chennai in Tamil Nadu, on May 30, 1863.
Wow.
This was the very first prehistoric stone tool discovered and recognized in India. It was a huge deal because it proved that India had a Stone Age history just like Europe and Africa.
और इसके बाद?
After that initial discovery, he and his colleague William King went on to identify more than 450 prehistoric sites across South India over the next few decades.
So he was a geologist. How did that influence his work?
That's his second major contribution, his methodological approach. He brilliantly integrated geology and archaeology.
कैसे?
He used his geological knowledge to correlate stone tools with specific geological strata, basically using the layers of the earth to help date the tools. This stratigraphic analysis became a foundational technique in Indian archaeology.
Right.
He was also the first person to systematically classify the stone tools he found into Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic categories based on their type and the geological context.
And he documented everything.
Meticulously. His third contribution is his legacy and documentation. He maintained detailed notes and catalogues of his findings.
Acha.
Huh.
His vast collections of artifacts were eventually sold to the Government Museum in Chennai, where they form the core of the prehistory collection. His writings and maps influenced generations of Indian archaeologists who followed him, like H.D. Sankalia.
Right.
In conclusion, Foote's legacy is monumental. His initial discovery and his interdisciplinary approach set the groundwork for the scientific study of India's ancient past.
What was Robert Bruce Foote's day job?
Quick hint. He was a geologist for the Geological Survey of India. His job was to survey for minerals, which is why he was out in the field and so good at understanding the geological context of his finds.
What is the significance of the 1863 Pallavaram hand axe?
Quick hint. It was the first. It was the definitive proof that India had a deep Stone Age history, which opened up a whole new field of scientific study in the country. What is stratigraphic analysis?
Quick hint. It's the simple but powerful geological principle that deeper layers of earth are older than the layers on top. By noting which layer a tool came from, Foote could create a relative timeline for prehistory.
How many sites did Foote identify?
Quick hint. An incredible number. More than 450. This shows his dedication and his systematic approach to surveying, which was far ahead of its time.
How did Foote's work set the stage for future archaeologists?
Quick hint. He provided the foundation, the first sites, the first tool classifications, and the first scientific methodological approach that all later archaeologists in India could build upon.
Practice this. Robert Bruce Foote is the father of Indian prehistory due to his 1863 discovery of the first Paleolithic tool at Pallavaram and his pioneering use of geological stratigraphy to classify and date prehistoric sites.
In short, Robert Bruce Foote was the man who literally found the starting point of India's deep history.
From a pioneering discovery to one of the most controversial and persistent debates in Indian history. Next up, the Aryan invasion theory.
Question. Debates on Aryan invasion.
Broad micro theme. The historical and archaeological debate surrounding the Aryan invasion theory and its alternatives.
It's a theory that has shaped discussions about ancient India for over a century, sparking intense academic and political debate. Did Aryans invade India and destroy the Indus Valley civilization? Let's get into the arguments.
To introduce the topic, the Aryan invasion theory, or AIT, was introduced in the 19th century by colonial-era scholars like Max Muller.
Right.
It posited that a race of light-skinned Indo-Aryans on chariots invaded or migrated to India from Central Asia around 1500 BCE, conquered the native dark-skinned Dravidians, destroyed the Harappan civilization, and established Vedic culture.
And ये एक बहुत debated topic है.
One of the most debated topics in Indian history.
So what was the original evidence for the theory?
The early arguments were based on three main pillars. First, linguistic evidence. The clear similarities between Sanskrit and other Indo-European languages like Latin and Greek suggested a common origin outside of India.
Okay.
Second, archaeological correlation. The decline of the IVC around 1900 BCE seemed to coincide with the proposed timeline of Aryan entry.
Right.
The appearance of horses and spoke-wheel chariots, not found in the mature IVC, was also linked to them. Third, textual interpretation.
जैसे?
Rigved's description of conflicts between the god Indra and the Dasa tribes, and the mention of Indra as Purandara, or destroyer of forts, was read as a literal story of the conquest of Harappan cities.
Okay. But the theory is now largely discredited. What are the critiques and alternatives?
The critiques are powerful and have changed the debate completely. Archaeologically, there is no evidence of a large-scale invasion or destruction at Harappan sites.
Right. Decline gradual था.
Gradual and likely due to climate change. The invasion idea has been mostly replaced by the AMT, or Aryan migration theory, which suggests a gradual migration of smaller groups over a long period, not a violent conquest.
और इसके against भी कोई theory है?
Yes, an opposing view is the indigenous Aryan theory, or out of India theory, which argues that the Aryans were native to India and that Vedic culture emerged from the IVC itself, citing cultural continuity.
And what does the latest science say?
This is crucial. Recent genetic evidence from skeletons at the Harappan site of Rakhighadi revealed no significant genetic ancestry from the Eurasian steppe.
जहाँ से Indo-Aryans आने थे.
During the Harappan period. This has been a major challenge to the invasion and large-scale migration narratives. The genetic evidence suggests a much more complex picture of smaller-scale migrations and mixing over a long period.
Right.
In conclusion, the Aryan debate remains complex and unresolved. The old, simplistic, violent invasion narrative has faded. The discussion now continues between models of gradual migration and indigenous origin theories, with genetics playing a key role in reshaping our understanding.
What is the main difference between the invasion and migration theories?
Quick hint. Invasion implies a violent military takeover in a short period. Migration suggests a slower, more gradual, and often peaceful movement of people and culture over centuries.
Why is the linguistic link between Sanskrit and European languages not proof of an invasion?
Quick hint. Language can spread through trade, small-scale migration, or cultural influence, not just conquest, which shows a connection but doesn't tell us the nature of that connection.
What is the biggest archaeological problem with the invasion theory?
Quick hint. The complete lack of archaeological evidence for a major war or destruction at Harappan sites around 1500 BCE that would correspond with a massive invasion. The decline was gradual and internal.
How has the DNA evidence from Rakhi Ghari changed the debate?
Quick hint. It has significantly weakened the large-scale migration invasion model for the Harappan period by showing genetic continuity between Harappans and later South Asian populations, without a major new genetic influx at that time.
What is the core idea of the indigenous Aryan theory?
Quick hint. That the Harappan civilization and the Vedic culture were created by the same people, and that the culture evolved within India and spread outwards, rather than being brought from outside.
Practice saying this, the Aryan invasion theory is now largely discredited due to a lack of archaeological and genetic evidence, with the debate shifting to more complex models of gradual migration versus indigenous cultural evolution.
In short, the old story of a dramatic Aryan invasion is a closed chapter, but the book on the complex origins of the people and cultures of ancient India is still being written with new scientific tools.
We've talked about the Neolithic Revolution. Now let's put it on the map. Where were the major Neolithic sites in India located?
Question. Distribution of Neolithic sites in India.
Broad micro-theme, geographical spread, and regional cultural characteristics of Neolithic sites in the Indian subcontinent.
The Neolithic period wasn't a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. It happened differently in different places at different times. So if you were to create a map of Neolithic India, what would it look like? Where were the hotspots of this agricultural revolution?
As an introduction, the Neolithic culture, defined by the shift to settled agriculture and the use of polished stone tools, is found in several distinct geographical clusters across India.
Acha, clusters mein.
Haan. These clusters reflect diverse environmental adaptations and cultural trajectories.
Let's go region by region. Where do we start in the north?
We start in the northwestern and Himalayan region. The key site here is Mehergarh in Balochistan, Pakistan.
Right.
जो हमें farming, wheat and barley और herding का earliest evidence देता है in South Asia, dating all the way back to 7000 BCE.
7,000?
हाँ.
Or Kashmir mein?
Then in the Kashmir Valley, we have Burzahom and Gufkral with their unique pit dwellings adapted to the cold climate.
Okay, what about the east?
In eastern and northeastern India, a key site is Chirand in Bihar on the banks of the Ganga.
Iski kya speciality hai?
It is unique for its large number of tools and ornaments made from bone and antler. In the northeast, we have Daujali Hadding in Assam, which is characterized by distinctive shouldered celts and cord-impressed pottery, showing cultural links to Southeast Asia.
And down south?
The South Neolithic in peninsular India, mainly in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, has the largest number of known settlements.
Okay.
Key sites include Teklakote, Piklihal, Halur, and Brahmagiri. The most unique feature here is the presence of Neolithic ash mounds.
Right, the burnt cow dung mounds? Huh.
These are vast mounds of burnt cow dung, which point to unique ritualistic practices involving cattle. They primarily cultivated millets and pulses, which were suited to the semi-arid climate.
Okay.
In conclusion, the widespread yet clustered distribution of Neolithic sites highlights the varied cultural responses to local ecological conditions. This regionalization is key to understanding the foundation of India's diverse cultural heritage.
What makes Burzahom's location near a lake significant?
Quick hint, it provided a reliable source of water and food from fishing, making a settled agricultural lifestyle more viable in a challenging cold climate.
Why is Mehergarh considered a precursor to the Indus Valley civilization?
Quick hint, because it shows the long, slow, in-place development of all the necessary components, farming, herding, crafts and settled villages that would later scale up to form the great Harappan cities.
What does the bone tools at Chirand tell us about the people there?
Quick hint, it shows they were resourceful and adaptive, using the materials that were most abundant in their local riverine environment, like bone and antler from hunted deer, to create their unique toolkit.
What is the current interpretation of the southern ash mounds?
Quick hint, they are believed to be the remains of ritually burnt community cattle pens. This indicates that cattle were absolutely central to their economy and their belief systems.
What does the overall clustered distribution of sites tell us?
Quick hint, it shows that the Neolithic Revolution wasn't a single event that spread evenly. It was a series of local adaptations that took root and flourished in specific, favorable environments at different times.
Distribution of Neolithic sites in India shows distinct regional clusters, such as the pit dwellings of Burzahom in the north, the bone tool culture of Chirand in the east, and the ash mound sites of the south, each reflecting unique environmental adaptations.
In short, the map of Neolithic India isn't uniform. It's a mosaic of different cultures, each finding its own unique path to the agricultural revolution.
We've mentioned it a few times, but now it's time for a deep look at a very specific and important tradition, the Sonian.
Question. Describe the Paleolithic culture with special reference to Sonian tradition. Indicate the problems of describe the Indian Paleolithic.
Broad microtheme. Characteristics and challenges of studying the Paleolithic cultural phase in India, focusing on the specialized Sonian tool tradition of the north.
When we talk about the Stone Age in India, हम अक्सर classic hand axe के बारे में सोचते हैं.
सही है.
But in the northern part of the subcontinent, in the foothills of the Himalayas, एक बिल्कुल अलग tool tradition थी जिसे Sonian कहते हैं. Let's explore what it was और इस incredibly ancient period को study करने के general challenges क्या हैं?
As an introduction, the Paleolithic period was the era of hunter-gatherers using stone tools. It's divided into lower, middle, and upper periods. The culture was all about survival and adaptation.
Okay, so let's get to the special reference, this Sonian tradition. What was it?
The Sonian culture is named after the river Sohan or Son in the Shivalik hills of Pakistan and India.
Acha.
It was a lower Paleolithic culture, contemporary with the Acheulean hand axe tradition found in peninsular India. But its tools were very different.
कैसे?
They were made from rounded quartzite pebbles from the river and were primarily choppers, chopping tools, discoids, and scrapers, not the pointed bifacial hand axes.
Okay.
The Sonian is typically divided into phases based on the river terraces they are found in. Early Soan with simple, heavy chopper chopping tools, and late Soan which had more advanced flake tools made using the level wire technique.
Interesting. So why is studying the Indian Paleolithic in general so difficult? What are the problems?
There are several major challenges. First, the fragmentary nature of the record.
मतलब evidence पूरा नहीं है?
हाँ, the evidence is often discontinuous, lost to time, geological activity, and erosion. We only have small snapshots. Second, limited research and exploration in many potential areas.
Right.
Third, technological variability. We now know that different tool types like the Swanian and Acheulean existed at the same time in different places, which makes creating a single, neat timeline for all of India impossible.
अच्छा.
Fourth, complex stratigraphy, where layers at sites are often mixed up by natural forces, which confuses the dating. And finally, a lack of organic material.
जैसे wood या bone.
Huh. Materials like wood or bone rarely survive for millions of years, leaving us with just the stone tools to interpret their entire lives. In conclusion, despite the challenges of a fragmented record and complex tool traditions, the rich data from cultures like the Swanian helps us document the evolution and adaptation of early human populations in the subcontinent.
What is the main difference between a Sowanian chopper and an Acheulean hand axe?
Second, a Sohanian chopper is usually a simple, heavy tool made from a pebble with a cutting edge flaked on one side. An Acheulean hand axe is a more complex, teardrop-shaped, bifacial tool worked on both sides to a point. They are two different technological solutions to the same problems.
Why is the Sowanian tradition named after a river?
Quick hint, because the tools were first identified in the terraces of the Sohan River, and these river terraces provided the geological context for dating the different phases of the culture.
What does the fragmentary nature of the record mean for archaeologists?
Quick hint, it means they are trying to assemble a giant jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing. They have to make interpretations based on very limited and scattered evidence.
How does technological variability make studying the Paleolithic difficult?
Quick hint, it messes up simple timelines. You can't just say this tool type is older than that tool type, because different groups were making different kinds of tools at the same time in different places to suit their local needs.
Why is the preservation of organic material so rare and so important?
Quick hint, stone tools tell us about technology, but organic remains, like a wooden spear, a bone needle, or plant remains, tell us so much more about hunting techniques, clothing, diet, and daily life. Their absence leaves huge gaps in our knowledge.
Practice this. The Sohanian tradition is a distinct lower Paleolithic chopper tool culture from the Shivalik hills, and studying it highlights the broader challenges in Indian Paleolithic research, such as the fragmentary record and regional technological variability.
In short, the Sonian tradition shows us that the Stone Age in India was diverse and that piecing together its full story is a massive archaeological challenge.
So far, we focused on ancient history. Now let's jump forward to a more recent but equally important topic, the role of tribal people in India's independence movement.
Question. What has been the contributions of tribal people to the Indian independence movement?
Broad micro-theme. Role of tribal communities in India's struggle for independence against colonial rule.
When we think of the freedom struggle, names like Gandhi, Nehru, and Bose often come to mind. But there was another powerful stream of resistance that often gets overlooked, the long and heroic struggles of India's tribal communities. What was their contribution?
To introduce the topic, tribal communities played a significant, powerful, though often underappreciated, role in the fight against British colonialism.
Acha.
Their resistance was often a two-pronged fight, fighting colonial exploitation and at the same time defending their own rights to land, forest and self-governance, or Jal, Jungle, Zameen.
So these were some of the earliest freedom fighters.
Absolutely. Many of their uprisings happened long before the mainstream nationalist movement of the Indian National Congress gained steam.
Koi example?
A key example is the Santhal rebellion of 1855-56, led by the brothers Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu, who led a massive uprising against the exploitation by outside moneylenders, Mahajans, and the British administration.
Right.
Then there was the Great Munda Rebellion, or Ulgulan, of 1899-1900 in the Chota Nagpur region, led by the legendary Birsa Munda.
Birsa Munda.
Who challenged the British land tenure system that was destroying their traditional Khund Katti system of communal land ownership. There were also many other regional revolts, like the Bhil and Koli rebellions in western India.
Did they also join the later 20th century movements?
Yes, their resistance evolved and often merged with the broader nationalist struggle. They became a key part of the forest satyagrahas in the 1920s and 30s, protesting the oppressive British forest forest laws that took away their traditional rights to forest produce.
अच्छा,
A famous example is the Gudum Rampa Rebellion, 1922-24, in Andhra Pradesh, led by Alluri Sitarama Raju, who was inspired by the non-cooperation movement.
right.
And tribal communities actively participated in mass movements like the Quit India movement of 1942, disrupting British administration and communication lines in their regions.
So their contribution was vital.
Bilkul. In conclusion, the contributions of tribal populations were vital to the freedom struggle. Their early and sustained resistance aimed at defending their rights and resources enriched the narrative of India's independence, ensured that the fight for freedom was happening in every corner of the country.
What was the main trigger for most early tribal revolts?
Quick hint. The disruption of their traditional relationship with their land and forests, Jal Jangal Zameen, by British colonial policies, and the exploitation by outside moneylenders and landlords who were protected by the British.
Who was Birsa Munda? And why is he so important?
Quick hint. He was the leader of the Munda Rebellion and became a powerful symbol of tribal resistance, autonomy, and cultural pride. He's revered as a freedom fighter and a religious leader.
How did the nature of tribal resistance change in the 20th century?
Quick hint. It began to integrate with broader nationalist ideas. Instead of just fighting for local rights, their leaders began to see their struggle as part of the larger fight to oust the British from India as a whole.
What was a forest satyagraha?
Quick hint. It was a form of non-violent protest inspired by Gandhi, where tribal communities would deliberately break restrictive colonial forest laws, like grazing their cattle or collecting forest produce, as an act of civil disobedience.
Why are tribal contributions often underappreciated in mainstream history?
Quick hint, because historical narratives have often focused on the urban, elite-led nationalist movement of the Congress Party, overlooking the crucial, parallel, and often more violent struggles happening in rural and forested areas.
Practices. Tribal contributions to the independence movement were significant, ranging from early, powerful anti-colonial uprisings like the Santhal and Munda rebellions to active participation in later nationalist movements like the Forest Satyagraha and Quit India movement.
In short, India's fight for freedom was fought not just in the cities by politicians, but also deep in the forests and hills by tribal communities who were among the first and fiercest to resist colonial rule.
We've talked about Harappan cities and their origins, but what about the people who live there? What was their society like?
Question. What kind of society may be reconstructed from the archaeological evidences of Harappan culture?
Broad micro theme, reconstructing the societal characteristics of the Harappan civilization through archaeological findings.
We have the magnificent ruins of their cities. But can we use these clues to travel back in time and reconstruct Harappan society? What were their lives, their beliefs, their economy like? Let's play archaeological detective.
As an introduction, the archaeological evidence from the Harappan civilization, though lacking readable texts, allows for a fairly detailed reconstruction of its highly organized urban, economic, and socio-religious structure.
Let's start with the cities. What do they tell us about their society?
The first point is their urban society and governance. The meticulous grid pattern planning of cities like Mohenjo-daro and Dholavira, with their advanced drainage and sanitation systems, suggests a society that valued hygiene, civic order, and public welfare.
Right.
The incredible standardization of brick sizes, weights, and measures across a vast area points to a strong and effective administrative system.
Or public structures.
Public structures like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro and the large granaries suggest a civic authority that could organize large-scale public works. For governance, the sheer uniformity suggests a sophisticated administrative system.
लेकिन palaces तो नहीं मिले.
Sahi pakade. The absence of grand palaces or royal tombs makes it different from Egypt or Mesopotamia. It might have been governed by a class of priests or merchants rather than a single king.
What about their economy? How did they make a living?
Their economy and livelihood was complex and multi-layered. It had a strong agrarian base, with evidence of them growing wheat, barley, cotton, and rice.
Or crafts?
But there was also a high level of craft specialization in making beads from semi-precious stones, beautiful pottery, and intricately carved seals. And most importantly, they engaged in extensive trade.
Right, with Mesopotamia.
The discovery of a dockyard at Lothal and Harappan seals in Mesopotamia proves they were part of a vast international trade network.
And what about social structure and religion? This must be harder to figure out without texts.
It is, but we have strong clues. For social stratification, the presence of a fortified raised citadel with larger houses and a lower town with smaller residences suggests some form of social hierarchy.
Okay.
The variation in the richness of burials also hints at this. For religion, we find numerous terracotta mother goddess figurines suggesting a fertility cult.
Right, or Pashupati seal?
The famous Pashupati seal, which depicts a seated, horned figure surrounded by animals, is often interpreted as a proto-Shiva. Fire altars found at Kalibangan and Lothal point to specific ritual practices.
Okay.
In conclusion, archaeology paints a picture of a disciplined, well-organized and prosperous civilization with remarkable technological and administrative sophistication, but a unique and still mysterious governance model.
What does a standardized brick size across hundreds of miles imply?
Quick hint. It implies a powerful central authority that could conceptualize and enforce standards. Whether this was a king, a council of elites, or a priestly class, it shows a high degree of social organization.
How does the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro suggest a religious or ritual function?
Quick hint. Its careful construction, steps leading down into the pool, and lack of a clear everyday purpose strongly suggest it was used for special, communal ritual bathing, a practice that has deep roots and continues in India today.
What is the best evidence for Harappan international trade?
Quick hint. The combination of the dockyard at Lothal, showing they had the infrastructure for sea trade, and the discovery of Harappan seals in modern-day Iraq, showing exactly where their goods went.
Why do archaeologists believe there was social stratification?
Quick hint. The physical division of the cities into a high, fortified citadel, where the elite likely lived, and a larger, lower town. This architectural separation almost certainly reflected a social separation.
What's the biggest mystery about Harappan governance?
Quick hint. The lack of a king. Unlike their contemporaries in Egypt and Mesopotamia, we haven't found any grand palaces, royal tombs, or clear depictions of all-powerful rulers, leaving us to wonder who was in charge of this vast, organized civilization.
Practice saying this. The Harappan society can be reconstructed as a highly organized urban civilization with a strong administrative system, a complex economy based on agriculture and trade, and religious practices centered on a mother goddess and a proto-Shiva figure.
In short, Harappan society was complex, organized, and prosperous, but its power structure remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved mystery.
We've seen that Mesolithic culture was a bridge to a new way of life. But was it the same everywhere? Let's examine the regional variations.
Question. Examine the regional variations of Mesolithic cultures of India.
Broad micro-theme, regional differences in environment, material culture, and settlement patterns characterizing the Mesolithic period in India.
The Mesolithic period was a time of great change, as the last ice age ended and the climate warmed up. But this change wasn't uniform across the vast Indian subcontinent. How did different environments lead to different Mesolithic cultures?
As an introduction, the Mesolithic period in India, defined by the use of microlithic tools, shows significant regional variation.
Acha.
This diversity was driven primarily by adaptation to different post-ice age ecological zones. While the core technology of microliths was similar, the lifestyles, settlement patterns, and subsistence strategies were not.
Let's start with the environment. How did it differ across India?
The new warmer Holocene climate created very different zones. Central India became wet and warm, with thick deciduous forests, creating perfect rock shelter habitats like Bhimbetka.
Right.
Western India, in Rajasthan and Gujarat, remained relatively dry with thorn forests and sand dunes. Peninsular India in the south was semi-arid, and the Ganga plains in eastern India became a vast, fertile alluvial plain with grasslands and riverine forests.
And how did these different environments lead to different cultures?
It shows up clearly in their material culture and site specificity. First, settlement patterns were different.
Kaise?
In the rocky terrain of central India, they used natural caves and rock shelters, like at Bhimbetka and Adamgarh. But in the open Ganga plains, they had to build their own huts.
Acha.
We find evidence of circular huts at Tilwara in Rajasthan, and even more substantial rectangular huts with paved floors at Sarai Nahar Rai in Uttar Pradesh. This also marks the first human colonization of the Ganga plains.
What about their food and economy?
That also varied significantly. Their economic strategies were adapted locally. In the rich forests of central India, they relied heavily on hunting a wide variety of fauna.
Okay.
In the drier environment of western India, at sites like Bagor, we see a greater reliance on animal herding and early domestication of sheep and goat, a clear step towards the Neolithic.
Right.
And of course, the most famous regional specialization is the incredible concentration of rock paintings in central India, especially at Bhimbetka, which depict their life, society, and beliefs in vivid detail.
Sahi baat hai.
In conclusion, the Mesolithic cultures of India display considerable regional diversity driven by environmental adaptation. These variations are critical for understanding how different groups laid the foundation for the Neolithic revolution in their own unique ways.
What is the single defining technology of the Mesolithic period everywhere?
Quick hint, the microliths, these small, efficient composite stone tools, are the one common technological thread that connects all these diverse regional cultures.
How does the settlement at Bhimbetka caves differ from Sarai Nahar Rai huts?
Quick hint, it shows adaptation to the local landscape. In a rocky, hilly region, you use natural shelters. In a flat river plain, where there are no caves, you have to build your own shelter.
Why is Bagor in Rajasthan so important for understanding Mesolithic variations?
Quick hint, it shows a very advanced stage of the Mesolithic, with semi-permanent settlements, some of the earliest evidence of domestication, and a rich material culture blurring the line with the early Neolithic.
What makes the rock art of central India a regional specialization?
Quick hint, while some rock art is found elsewhere, the sheer quantity, quality, and long-time depth of the paintings at sites like Bhimbetka are unparalleled, suggesting that art and ritual were a particularly important part of their culture in this specific region.
How did the colonization of the Ganga plains in the Mesolithic change the map of human settlement in India?
Quick hint, it was a major expansion. For the first time, humans moved out of the hilly, rocky areas and successfully adapted to and settled in the vast, fertile alluvial plains, opening up a huge new territory for future populations.
Practice this. Mesolithic India was not monolithic. It was a mosaic of regional cultures, with distinct variations in settlement, subsistence strategies, and art, all driven by adaptation to different post-ice age environments.
In short, The Mesolithic story in India has many different chapters, each written in a different landscape with its own unique challenges and opportunities.
We've talked about tribal resistance to the British, but their contribution to Indian civilization goes back much, much further. Let's explore that deep connection.
Question. Explain the contribution of tribal cultures to Indian civilization.
Broad micro-theme: the enrichment and formation of Indian civilization through the traditions, customs, knowledge, and practices of tribal communities.
Indian civilization is often described as a great river with many different streams flowing into it to create a powerful current.
Right.
One of the most ancient and powerful of those streams is the immense contribution of tribal cultures. How have they shaped the India we know today?
As an introduction, the contributions of tribal cultures are diverse, profound, and foundational. They have enriched India's cultural heritage in almost every sphere, from language and religion to technology, agriculture, and social structure. It is impossible to imagine Indian civilization without these contributions.
Let's start with language. How did they contribute?
Their contribution to language and literature is huge. Many linguists believe that several sounds in the Vedic Sanskrit language, like retroflex consonants, the t and d sounds, were borrowed from local tribal languages.
Interesting.
Hundreds of words in Sanskrit, like langala, plow, have Austroasiatic or Dravidian tribal origins. The very fabric of Indian languages is a blend.
What about social structure? That seems very different from the mainstream caste society.
There was a lot of influence and exchange. Recent studies suggest that the Gotra system of exogamous clans was originally a tribal system based on totems, which was later adopted and adapted by Brahmins.
Acha.
Some marriage customs, like cross-cousin marriage, which is common in South India, were also likely borrowed from tribal societies.
Right.
And the egalitarian, democratic functioning of the early Buddhist sanghas was said to be modeled on the tribal republican patterns of governance.
That's fascinating. What about practical knowledge, like technology and agriculture?
This is a huge area of contribution. For technology, it's believed by many historians that the Indo-Aryans learned the use and smelting of iron from the Asura tribe of Central India.
Iron smelting, wow.
In agriculture, tribal communities were the pioneers of many practices like rotational cropping and developed thousands of local strains of rice. And in medicine, indigenous tribal knowledge of medicinal herbs and plants was incorporated into Ayurveda.
Sahi hai.
Magical formulae from the Savara tribe were even incorporated into the Atharva Veda.
And finally, religion and art?
The diffusion here is immense. Many mainstream Hindu gods and goddesses evolved from local tribal deities through a process of synthesis.
Jaise?
For example, Lord Jagannath of Puri has deep tribal roots. Ancestor worship and the worship of fertility gods and goddesses have deep tribal roots. Even popular festivals have links to tribal harvest festivals.
Or music?
And in music, instruments like the veena, are believed to be derived from tribal stringed instruments. In conclusion, Indian civilization has been significantly enriched by the dynamic participation and integration of the knowledge and practices of these ancient inhabitants.
The culture is a composite of Aryan and non-Aryan elements, a true synthesis.
What is the significance of tribal words being found in Sanskrit?
Quick hint, it's direct linguistic proof of deep interaction and borrowing. It shows that these cultures were not isolated, but were in constant dialogue and influencing each other.
How does the Gotra system link back to tribal society?
Quick hint, in many tribal societies, clans are totemic, linked to an animal or plant ancestor, and strictly exogamous. You must marry outside your clan, which is the fundamental principle of the Gotra system.
What is the best example of a technological transfer from a tribal culture?
Quick hint, the knowledge of iron smelting. It's believed to have been learned by the later Vedic people from iron-using tribes like the Asuras. This was a game-changing technology for agriculture and warfare.
How were tribal religious practices absorbed into mainstream Hinduism?
Quick hint, through a gradual process of synthesis or universalization, where a local, tribal deity or practice is identified with a major Hindu god or ritual and absorbed into the larger tradition, often retaining some of its local flavor.
What does the influence on the Buddhist Sangha tell us?
Quick hint. It shows that tribal models of egalitarian and democratic social organization were seen as an influential and desirable alternative to the hierarchical caste system prevalent at the time.
Social structures like the Gotra system, technology like iron use, and the synthesis of religious practices and deities.
In short, much of what we think of as ancient Indian civilization has its roots in the knowledge, traditions, and wisdom of the subcontinent's original tribal communities.
Let's journey south again to look specifically at the Neolithic cultures of that region.
Question. Neolithic cultures of South India.
Broad micro-theme: archaeological features, economy, and settlement patterns of the Neolithic period in peninsular India.
We've talked about the southern ash mounds before, but let's take a closer look. What defined the Neolithic revolution in South India? What made it unique?
As an introduction, the Neolithic culture of South India, concentrated in the semi-arid regions of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, was a distinct cultural phenomenon.
Okay.
It's a region with over 850 Neolithic settlements identified, showing a widespread and successful adaptation to the environment.
So what was their economy based on?
They practiced a distinctive agro-pastoral economy, Cattle herding was predominant and central to their lives.
Right.
This is proven by the famous and unique ash mounds. These are vast, towering mounds of vitrified ash, believed to be the remains of accumulated cow dung from ceremonial cattle pens that were ritually burned.
Right, cattle was central.
In agriculture, they cultivated millets like ragi and pulses, which are crops well suited to the dry climate and did not require intensive irrigation.
And what about their material culture and lifestyle?
The culture shows a three-phase succession. The earliest phase, starting around 2300 BCE, had polished stone tools, celts, and handmade grey or brown pottery.
Okay.
Later phases saw the use of copper and bronze objects, showing they became connected to wider trade networks.
Acha.
Interestingly, the skeletal remains of a domesticated horse were found at the site of Halur in Karnataka from this period. They lived in simple circular huts made of wattle and daub, usually located on the tops of granite hills for defense and proximity to grazing lands.
Or burials?
For their rituals, they buried their dead, including children, in clay urns right under the floors of their houses.
Interesting.
In conclusion, the Neolithic period in South India was a transformative era that laid the groundwork for later historical developments in the region, with a unique cultural focus on cattle, pastoralism.
What is the most unique feature of the South Indian Neolithic?
Quick hint, the ash mounds. They are not found anywhere else in the world in this form, and point to a unique ritual and economic focus on cattle that was central to their society.
What crops did they grow and why is that significant?
Quick hint, they grew millets and pulses. This shows a clever and successful adaptation to the semi-arid climate of the Deccan Plateau, as these crops are drought-resistant and do not need as much water as wheat or rice.
What does burial under the house floor suggest? Quick hint, it suggests a strong connection to ancestors and the home. It shows a desire to keep the deceased members of the family close even after death, which is a powerful statement about their social beliefs.
What does the eventual appearance of copper and bronze tell us?
Quick hint, it shows they were not isolated. They became connected to the wider technological changes of the Chalcolithic period and were part of a growing network of trade and exchange for new materials and ideas.
What is the significance of the horse remains at Halur?
Quick hint, it's significant because the present horses in ancient India is a highly debated topic. This find provides an early piece of archaeological evidence from the south that adds to that complex discussion.
Practice this. The South Indian Neolithic is characterized by a unique agro-pastoral economy with a strong ritual emphasis on cattle, evidenced by massive ash mounds, and an agricultural system adapted to a semi-arid environment through the cultivation of millets.
In short, the Neolithic revolution in South India was powered by cattle and crops suited to a dry land, creating a unique and successful culture.
From the Neolithic, let's move to the next technological phase, the Chalcolithic or Copper Stone Age, specifically in the Deccan region.
Question. Describe the salient features of Chalcolithic cultures of the Deccan.
Broad micro-theme, archaeological, economic and social characteristics of the Copper Stone Age cultures in the Deccan region of India.
After stone but before iron, there was copper. The Chalcolithic was the age when humans first started using metal alongside their traditional stone tools. It was a major transition. What was this period like in the Deccan?
As an introduction, the Chalcolithic culture in the Deccan was not a single uniform culture, but a mosaic of related regional cultures.
Okay.
It was a period of great complexity, defined by distinct pottery styles, settlement patterns, and emerging social stratification. We can divide it into three major interacting zones.
Okay, let's break down those zones.
First, we have the Ahar Banas zone in southeastern Rajasthan, known for its distinctive black and red ware pottery and evidence of copper smelting.
Acha.
Second, the Madhya Pradesh zone, which includes the Kayatha and Malwa cultures. The Malwa culture, in particular, is famous for having the richest and most diverse Chalcolithic ceramics in India.
Okay.
And third, and most extensively studied, is the northern Deccan, centered in Maharashtra, which hosted the Jorwe culture, known for sites like Inamgaon and Daimabad.
What were the common features? Let's talk about their technology and material culture.
Their material culture had a mixed base. They used both copper and stone tools, hence the name Chalcolithic.
Right.
The Jorwe culture had a good number of copper tools like axes, chisels, and beads, but the stone blade industry, made of chalcedony, was still very important for everyday tasks.
Or pottery?
Their pottery was a defining feature, with each culture having its own unique style. For example, the Jorwe culture is famous for its red pottery painted with black geometric designs.
And their society and economy?
Their settlements ranged from small rural villages to large fortified, almost urban centers like Daimabad, suggesting emerging social stratification and a chiefdom-level society.
Right.
For their economy, they were primarily food producers, cultivating crops like rice, barley, and wheat, and domesticating animals.
Or trade.
The Jorwe culture even traded for gold and ivory from Karnataka. We also see clear evidence of religion, with terracotta figurines of a mother goddess and fire altars.
Acha. Or unke burials?
The Jorwe people had a peculiar burial custom. They buried their dead in urns under the house floor, but often with the feet cut off.
Interesting.
In conclusion, the Chalcolithic cultures of the Deccan highlight a period of significant socio-economic complexity and technological innovation, providing valuable insights into the transition towards the subsequent Iron Age urbanism.
What are the two types of materials that define the Chalcolithic period?
Quick hint, copper, chalco, and stone, lithic. The name itself tells you, It's a transitional period where the new technology of metal was used alongside the old technology of stone.
What is the most easily identifiable feature that distinguishes the different Deccan Chalcolithic cultures?
Quick hint, their pottery. The color, fabric, and the style of painted designs on the pottery are like a signature or a brand for each culture. Ahar, Malwa, Jorve. An expert can tell the culture from a single sherd.
What does the settlement pattern at Daimabad, a Jorve culture site, suggest?
Quick hint, its large size, evidence of public architecture, and fortification suggest it was a regional center or a proto-urban center, indicating a more complex, hierarchical society than a simple farming village.
What is the most common interpretation of burying the dead with their feet cut off?
Quick hint, it's a mysterious ritual. But one common theory is that it was a belief-based practice done to prevent the spirit of the dead from walking and returning to haunt the living.
What does the presence of gold and ivory at a Jorve site like Inamgaon tell us about their economy?
Quick hint, it proves they were part of a long-distance trade network. Since neither gold nor ivory is locally available in Maharashtra, they must have been trading with communities in the south, likely in Karnataka.
Practice this. The Deccan Chalcolithic is characterized by distinct regional cultures like Ahar, Malwa, and Jorve, each identified by its unique pottery, a mixed copper-stone technology, and clear evidence of social complexity and long-distance trade.
In short, the Deccan Chalcolithic was a vibrant mosaic of cultures, mastering the new technology of copper while building complex societies and trade networks that set the stage for the future.
And that's all the time we have for this deep dive into India's prehistoric and proto-historic past. From the first stone tools to the grand cities of the Indus Valley, what an incredible adventure.
Let's quickly recap what we've learned. The overarching theme has been the evolution of Indian culture and civilization.
First, हमने देखा कि human societies कैसे simple Paleolithic hunter-gatherers से, with toolkits like the Sonian and Acheulean, evolve होके complex state-level organizations बनी, driven by technology, environment, and ideology.
Right.
Sites like Atirampakkam in the south ने हमें ये incredible journey of over 1 million years दिखाई.
Second, we witnessed the rise and sophistication of the Indus Valley civilization. Through sites like Rakhigadi, Dholavira, and Lothal, we understood their incredible urban planning, vast trade networks, and the mounting evidence for their indigenous origins, moving beyond outdated invasion theories.
Third, हमने crucial transitional phases, the Mesolithic and Neolithic को explore किया, जहां हमने settled life, agriculture और complex social practices जैसे भीमबेटका की rock art और कश्मीर के unique burials और pit dwellings के पहले कदम देखें.
हाँ.
Sites like Bagor and Meherbad were key to understanding this shift.
Finally, we acknowledged the immense and foundational contributions of tribal cultures, whose knowledge, practices, and languages have been woven into the very fabric of Indian civilization from the very beginning, and who continued to fight for their autonomy during the independence struggle.
हमने देखा कि material culture, a pot, a tool, a bead, हमें past को reconstruct करने में कैसे help करता है. But what about the things that don't survive?
जैसे?
The stories, the songs, the beliefs, the social rules. How much of our ancient past is truly lost to time, and how much of it survives in ways we might not even recognize, hidden in the rituals, languages, and traditions we practice today?
That's a deep thought to end on. If this journey sparked your curiosity, make sure you're subscribed because we have so much more to explore together. Comment below with the one fact that blew your mind the most. Would love to hear from you. Until next time, keep digging, keep learning.